Gajananam bhutaganari sevitam kapita jambu palasara bhakshitam Umasutam shokavinashakaranam namami Vigneshwara pada pankajam Shadananam kumkumaraktavarnam mahamatim divya mayuravahanam Rudrasya sanam surasainanatam guham sadaham sharanam prapadye Ya kundendu tushara haradavala ya shubra vastra prita Ya vina varadanda mandidakara ya shweta padmasana Ya brahma chuta shankara prabhutavir devai sada pujita Samam patu saraswati bhagavati nishesha jatyapaha Om namah shivaya gurave Satchidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Shri Shivanandaya Te Namaha Shri Vishnu Devanandaya Te Namaha Om Sarva Mangala Mangalye Shive Sarvata Sadike Sharanye Triambake Gauri Narayani Namostute Narayani Namostute Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. I salute my gurus. Om Bolo Sadguru Shivananda Maharaj Ki Jai. Swami Vishnu Devananda Maharaj Ki Jai. Om Tat Sat. So I'd like to welcome you on behalf of my gurus, who you can see behind me. Swami Shivananda, Swami Shivananda, whose name our organization carries, and then his disciple here above me, Swami Vishnu Devananda, who was a disciple of Swami Shivananda and who started our organization back in 1957, in our headquarters being in Canada, Valmoran, with branches around the world. As I've mentioned, I'm based in the Shivananda Dhanvantri Ashram in South India, Kerala. So the subject is called The Art of Pratyahara, and I'm very happy to have this topic. It's a subject that I feel is very important for yogis, particularly if you're interested in meditation. It's a very, very important concept and practice that we should understand thoroughly and know how to put it into practice. Because certainly our meditation will depend a lot on this practice, and generally our life can be very much affected by how much we can practice pratyahara in our day-to-day life. It can change the quality of our life. So what is pratyahara? Pratyahara, this word is taken from two Sanskrit words, prati. Prati means to be away or against, and ahara is strictly food, but any form of ingestion can be called ahara. Any form of intake can be called ahara. So the combination of prati ahara means to be away from ingestion, to not take things in. It could be food, but as we will see today, it'll be about all sorts of sensory experiences. How we can stay away from sensory input and why that's important. So Pratyahara is of course mentioned by Patanjali Maharishi in the Yoga Sutras, and specifically what we call the Ashtanga Yoga system, which if you are familiar with yoga system, you'll know about Ashtanga, the 8 steps of yoga. Patanjali defines yoga as yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is stopping the vibrations or the thoughts in the mind. So he describes the 8 steps, or Ashtanga, which literally means 8 steps or 8 limbs, how to come to the state of thoughtlessness, which he calls samadhi. So samadhi is a state where the mind is completely still and quiet, and then he says we are resting in our own true nature. So the 8 steps are intended how to help us move towards this level of mental stillness. And Pratyahara actually falls right in the middle of those 8 steps. It's step number 5, yes. So the first 2 steps are called yama and niyama. The yamas are what we call the ethical codes of conduct, how to live a peaceful and harmonious life. Includes things like non-injury, non-violence, truthfulness, not stealing, etc. And then there is the niyamas, the second step, the observances. These are 5 codes to help us implement a positive lifestyle. Includes things like doing austerities and devoting to God, surrender to God, keeping cleanliness, both physical and mental, and other practices like this. The third and fourth steps are physical stages. One is called asana, how to control the physical body and to be able to sit still and be comfortable for the practice of meditation. Then the next step, the fourth step, is called pranayama, how to be able to control the breath. By controlling and slowing down our breath, we are able to control and slow down our mind. So that is the pranayama step. Then the 5th step, as I mentioned, is pratyahara. So pratyahara is a transition stage from the physical world and from the physical body to the mental world, to the mind. And pratyahara can be translated as control of the senses or withdrawal of the senses. And as I said, it's a transition from the physical world to our mental world. And of course, we engage the world through our 5 senses. So pratyahara is how we can develop the skill to control these senses and thereby be able to control the mind. Just to finish the 8 steps, so after pratyahara, the next stage is called dharana, or concentration. So this is now working with the mind. The next 3 stages are all part of the mind. So working with dharana means being able to keep your mind focused on one point. And if that is able to be kept up without much effort, it becomes what we call dhyana. Dhyana means meditation, where the mind has now quite comfortably been able to stay fixed in one place and without wavering this way and that way. So this is called the dhyana or meditation stage. And beyond that comes what is called the samadhi. Samadhi is where now the mind is completely empty of all thoughts, including the thought of one's own individuality or ego. And then one will experience an expanded consciousness, we say. And you lose a sense of your own individuality and you start to experience the unity of life, where they say the meditator and the meditated and the meditation become one, or the knower, the known, and the knowledge become one thing. And that's the state of non-duality, which is considered like the highest state of consciousness in the yoga system. So that's the whole range of Ashtanga, and as we saw, the Pratyahara falls in the middle. And it's also mentioned in another important text, which is called the 7 Bhumikas, or the 7 stages of development, by another sage called Sage Vasishta. Sage Vasishta talks about the 7 stages of spiritual development, and the first stage, which he calls Subecha, he describes the important qualities that a spiritual aspirant should have to be able to go further in their understanding, specifically in their understanding of Jnana Yoga, or what we might call Vedanta. This is a slightly different approach from the yoga system. This is more of an intellectual approach based on contemplation and understanding and questioning the nature of truth and trying to understand the ultimate reality about ourselves. in a more intellectual way. So generally, Jnana Yoga is more challenging than the yoga system of meditation because it requires a very sharp and focused mind. And we usually say that all the other yogas are necessary to help us come to this level of practice, that we need to purify ourselves through karma yoga, bhakti yoga, devotional practice, and the Raja Yoga of Patanjali through meditation, learning how to control the mind. Then at that stage, our mind will be sufficiently clear and disciplined enough to be able to focus on these philosophical questions. So Sage Vasishta mentioned 4 qualities that an aspirant should have before they fit to do this kind of contemplation. And they are called Viveka, discrimination between what is real or permanent and what is unreal or impermanent. The next one is called Vairagya, or dispassion. And the third one is called Shatsampat. Shatsampat is actually another list of 6 qualities that one needs to cultivate to again develop a quiet and calm state of mind. And the 4th qualification is called Mumukshutva, the desire for liberation, desire for freedom. And that's the basic desire, I think, that all spiritual aspirants have, that we feel we want to be free of all limitations, both physical, mental, and psychological, etc., and to come to higher states of consciousness. This is a kind of common desire that certainly spiritual aspirants have. So that is called Mumukshutva, this desire. Now, why I'm mentioning this? Because in the Shatsampat, in the 6 qualities, the first one is called Sama. Sama means the ability to have a calm and peaceful mind, that one should have developed a fairly calm and peaceful mind before we can really study the philosophy in an earnest and serious way. Now, of course, this is not an easy thing to do. How to cultivate and sustain a calm and peaceful mind. So the next 5 points are points about how we can do this. And the second point is called Dhamma. Dhamma means control of the organs. And here we're talking about both sensory as well as motor organs. So when we talk about control of the sensory organs, essentially it's the same as the Pratyahara of Patanjali, how to control the sense organs. And then Vasishta also considers the motor organs, that if we cannot control our senses, then we should also at least try to control the way we react to the situations. So we might not be able to, disconnect from the stimuli around us, but how do we react? That's another level. And that means how do we control our responses? So Dhamma includes how we use our hands, our feet, our mouth for speech. And then it also includes the anus and the genitals for those body functions. So this why I brought it up is because it's also part of the Vedanta system, the Jnana Yoga, that Pratyahara, or control of the senses, is also very much part of that process. And specifically, it's there to help us to develop a calm and peaceful state of mind. And that's essentially what the Pratyahara is there for, how we can develop a calm and peaceful state of mind, whether for meditation or for deeper contemplation on philosophy. Now, before I get more into the details of Pratyahara and how we can practice it, it would be worthwhile spending a little bit of time to understand the nature of the mind. Some basic concepts will be very helpful to then appreciate how Pratyahara works. So, what is the mind? So, there's a definite difference between the Western psychology and what we might call Eastern philosophy, or even Western philosophy. When we consider Western philosophy, traditional Western philosophy, it's pretty much based on the statement of René Descartes, the famous French philosopher, and I think he was also a statesman. his statement was, "I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am." So with this insightful statement, he was able to very simply state that my existence is a consequence of my thinking. And this is very much the way we think about ourselves in the modern psychology and even neurosciences, that there's the physical brain, and out of this physical brain there are things that are called thoughts that are generated, and that these thoughts create our reality. And essentially who or what I am is a product of my mind, my thoughts. And this is normally how we go see ourselves in life. If my mind is unhappy, I say I am unhappy. If my mind is in a good mood, then I say I am happy, and so on. And that not only includes our feelings, but it includes all our background, our education, our culture. We use all these things as, identities, how we define ourselves, which are basically all based on the mind. Basically, from the Western point of view, Western psychology, we are our thoughts. And we can say that is the nature of the mind. The mind is basically just a collection of thoughts. Okay? Now, when it comes to the Eastern psychology, which is based on, on the philosophies, we can use the same statement, but we can say it in a slightly different way. We can say, I am, therefore I think. That I have an existence, there is an existence. And because of that existence, there is a possibility that I can think. That I will exist even if I'm not thinking. This is the concept. That my existence is permanent and unchanging. And superimposed on this is the mind. So the mind is a kind of add-on. It's not my ultimate reality. It's a superimposition, you could say. So of course, it's quite a different point of view. And this is the basis of all the Eastern spiritual practices, is to come to know who are we beyond this mind. Who are we beyond this mind? And that's why we are doing things like meditation, for example. We're trying to experience ourselves even when the mind is not active, as Patanjali mentioned. And in fact, we can even say in our everyday common experience, we have this experience. Every day when we go to sleep, we have some time where we are in what we call a deep sleep state. In deep sleep, we say that the mind is not active. And that's basically our experience. When we're in the deep sleep, we have no appreciation for time or space, where we are or how long we've been there. And we don't even have an appreciation for our own identity. Who am I when we're in the deep sleep? There's no sense of me and something else. There's not even an experience of me. So we say that in that state, we are in a very mindless state. But nevertheless, we have an existence. And actually, that existence is quite enjoyable. When we wake up from the deep sleep, it's pretty universal. Everyone says, I had a good sleep. It's a universally appreciated experience. I've yet to find anyone to say, I did not have a good deep sleep. Everyone appreciates it. So there is an existence there that we all share, and it's something beyond our mind. So this is concept number one from the Eastern philosophy, is that we are not the mind. Okay, that's the first concept. And this approach makes it much, much easier for us to come to terms with the mind. If we think we are the mind, then we put ourselves in a very limited situation, because it's kind of very difficult to work on the mind when we identify with it. But as soon as we can step away from it and see it as something objectively, or see it as an objective thing, then it makes it much, much easier to look at it, study it, and then ultimately even know how to manipulate it or control it and work with it. So that's the first point about the mind, that from the Eastern philosophy, we are not the mind. The mind is just a processing system. I use the analogy of a computer. I said that the physical brain is like the hardware of a computer, and the software is basically the operation, which is like the mind. The mind is the operating system and the processing that's going on in that hardware. And the outcome of this is what we call our thoughts, and which we are all aware of course. We are all aware of our thoughts. By thoughts, I mean all the mental experiences, including our memories, our imaginations, our feelings, our dreams. All of these are mental phenomena that we experience, and we said these are all part of the mind. So essentially, the mind is just a collection of thoughts. The next point is, where do thoughts come from? So it's not actually a very difficult question. If you consider all the thoughts that you have in your mind, where they all come from. Basically, they've all come from our experiences, what we have experienced in life. And all our experiences, where have all our experiences come from? Basically through the five senses. We don't have any other senses. We are limited to these five perceptions, sensations. And if you look at all our thoughts, they are a product of those five sensations. There's no kind of thought that is beyond the five senses. If you take an example, you can even think of an abstract example. Say the abstract concept of love. Okay, love is not a specific object, physical object, but when I say this word love, in your mind you will have certain associations. It will be different from one person to another. Maybe you will feel a warm feeling in your chest. Okay, so you've related it to something objective. Or maybe you'll be thinking of somebody that you love, or a pet. Or maybe you'll see some kind of symbol like a red heart. There's any number of possibilities what you associate that abstract word with. But whatever you associate it, whichever form, it will be a form. And that form will ultimately be describable based on the five senses. So there's no form that you can have that doesn't include the five senses, because that's all we have. So essentially all our thoughts are related to our experiences through these five senses. Okay? And of course the mind manipulates them, rearranges them, analyzes them, decodes them, puts them into different combinations. You know, it can do many things, but ultimately it all comes down to the same basis of the five sensations. So in this sense, we say the mind is like a sponge. You know, these five senses are like windows to the world, and the mind is basically just absorbing everything through these five senses and then organizing them in some way, which makes up our mental content. And this can be quite well organized, of course. If you consider our personality and character, which is also a product of our experiences, all our education, all our culture based on the community we live with, the family we live with, and all those things. These all make up our character, our personality. So there, of course, you can see the point of what René Descartes was saying. I think, therefore I am. How I describe myself is based on my thought content, which includes my personality and character. All of this is a product of my experiences. So the mind is like a sponge. It's absorbing all these experiences, and because we've all had different kinds of experiences, we have different kinds of minds, and so on. So that's one quality of the mind. Another quality of the mind is that the mind is always outgoing. Outgoing means the mind is always interested in some new sensations. The mind is always interested in seeing something new, or hearing something new, or tasting something new, or tasting something better, or feeling something, right, or smelling something. Those are basically 5 senses. And that makes sense, because basically the sensations are like food for the mind. So naturally the mind will want to have more food. It will always want to feed itself. So naturally it's always going to be interested in going out and exploring the world through the 5 senses. So that is its nature. And that will be, as we see later, one of the big challenges we have to face when we try to practice Pratyahara. We're going against the very nature of the mind. The nature of the mind is to go out. So, do we have any control over this process? Do we have any control over what's going on in our mind? Do we have any control on the effects of the senses on our mind? We often think that we are quite passive in this situation, you know. We're in a situation, we're exposed to things, and we're absorbing the experiences, the sensations, and they're getting processed by our mind. Do we have any conscious control over this process? Well, this is where Pratyahara starts. Pratyahara or yoga says, yes, we do have control over it. We can determine what kind of effect the senses will have on our mind. So we can break down the process into 3 steps. First of all, there's what we call sensations. Sensations are basically what's happening at the sense organ level. So when light comes to your eye, certain reactions will happen in your eyeball, and they will create a certain impulse which will go to your optic nerve, which will be transferred to your brain. And likewise, when you touch something, there'll be certain stimulations on your sense organs and hearing, etc. So these are called the sensations at the sense organ level, which we cannot control. You know, as long as our eyes are open, light will fall in our eyes and there will be a reaction. Actually, it's not completely true. We can even control it at that level. And if I come back to that point about Dhamma, control of the motor organs. So we can control our body parts. So we have the ability to close our eyes. If we close our eyes, we can cut off the sensations at that point. Maybe we don't have that much control over the other senses, but the eyes, certainly we do. And the eyes are actually the most powerful sense in the human species. We are mostly visually orientated. So the fact that we can control our eyes and we can even close our eyes gives us quite a bit of power to be able to control the vision. The next most important sense, of course, is hearing. That we don't have that much. Certainly we don't have physical control, apart from maybe blocking our ears or putting headphones into our ears, in which case we can disconnect ourselves from the environment. But otherwise, we can't really control what's coming into our ears. So that's the sensation level. The sensations are passed on to the brain, certain parts of the brain, and different parts of the brain will interpret those sensations and convert them into a thought form. So the impulse from your eyes, which is a nervous impulse, goes to the back of your brain, the occipital part, and there it will generate vision for you. Another impulse coming from your ear, but essentially the same kind of nervous impulse will come to another part of your brain, and it'll create sound for you, and so on. So we perceive these different, according to different parts of the brain, we have different perceptions, which become our thoughts. Sound, vision, smell, taste, touch. So that is called perception. The brain is decoding that impulse and making it into a form that you can recognize in your mind. And it will be associated with your memories so that you can recognize it and interpret it, etc. Then there is another level beyond the perception, which is called attention. So from sensation to perception, and now we come into attention. Attention is where we can consciously decide to put our awareness, our mind, our focus. And we say this is coming from the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes of the brain are directing where we choose to put our attention. So here is where we have some free choice consciously. We can choose to focus on sensations or perceptions, or also ignore them. And there are various ways we can apply attention, but generally we're just saying trying to focus on one thing to the exclusion of other things. And that is a conscious process, and where a place where we have choice about what we choose to focus on. And this is where Pratyahara will work. How do we put this into practice? So I use the words. It's English semantics, so I hope that makes sense to you. But basically, if you can appreciate the difference between seeing and looking. Seeing and looking. I'm starting with the most important sense, the vision. So seeing is, as long as your eyes are open, you will see things. You'll perceive them. But looking, we say, is when you consciously apply your attention there. You put your focus onto something that you're seeing, right? A good example of this would be, you're sitting somewhere in a waiting room and you pick up a glossy magazine and you're just flipping through the pages of the glossy magazine. After some time, something might catch your attention. It's usually a picture or some headline, some word will stand out and catch your attention, and you'll stop. And now you'll stop seeing, and now you'll start looking. Your mind will actively focus on that picture or that word, and you'll start reading more about it or taking interest in it. So now you're consciously focusing your mind, and now you started to look. And that's a kind of conscious decision. Although often it's happening unconsciously, if you're in the advertising industry, no doubt you understand this concept very well. You know that what are the important trigger points that will catch people's attention. And thereby you can, catch people's attention by using certain words or pictures and unconsciously catch their attention. But it's not a totally unconscious ability. We can develop conscious control over this. The same thing with hearing, the difference between hearing and listening. We might hear sounds around us, but we might decide to listen with attention and focus our mind on one sound only. If we're trying to hear someone speaking in a crowd or on a telephone with a lot of background sounds, we will listen more intently to focus on that particular sound to the exclusion of others. Then, of course, the sense of smell and taste. Smell and taste are very closely associated. So the difference between tasting and relishing. When we put something in our mouth, we taste it. We'll have a taste. It's sweet, it's sour, it's bitter, whatever. But then very quickly we will start deciding, is it something I like? Is it something pleasant or unpleasant? Is it the type of taste I like or not like? And that's called relishing. And then according to our tastes, we will decide whether we'll eat more or less of it, and so on, and how much we will enjoy it. So that is actually a conscious choice, because there is nothing absolute about these things. What one person likes, another person doesn't like. What another person likes, another person dislikes. So we all have our personal choices, and we are going according to those choices. Finally, you could say the difference between feeling, touching and feeling. When you touch something, you'll touch it. You'll have a sensation. But if you like the touch, you'll like to feel it more. If you don't like the touch, you'll want to withdraw yourself from that. Stop feeling it. So like that. So this is the subtle area where we can bring more awareness to our sensations and perceptions. And we can be more conscious about them. and try to assume more mindfulness and control over the perceptions. And the idea is that we can come into that seeing, hearing, touching, tasting level without getting pulled into that attention, where the sensation takes our attention away and essentially could be a distraction. So the ability to see without looking, the ability to hear without listening, the ability to taste without relishing, and the ability to touch without feeling. This is one way we can describe Pratyahara. And it's something we can do consciously. We just have to be a bit more mindful about the perceptions and see how we are reacting to them. And then consciously we can step back. And this will have many positive benefits for us. Basically, it will help our mind to be more focused. If you consider the situation, we want to go to the supermarket to buy something, some basic essentials, bread and milk, for example. We run out of bread and milk, we want to go to the supermarket. So we go to the supermarket and we go through the supermarket, we come back to the checkout. And how often is it that we come out with much more than bread and milk in the basket? Almost invariably, we will have that situation. In fact, sometimes, I find myself coming out and I don't even have the bread and milk. I've got a whole lot of other things which I didn't intend to buy at all. But somehow, of course, the way these shops and things are organized, they put things in such a way that they will catch your attention and obviously tempt you to buy these things. So that's because I was not practicing Pratyahara. I allowed my mind to go out into all these various sensory experiences and to get attached to them and attracted to them and influence my behavior. So I was not able to practice Pratyahara. If I was able to practice Pratyahara, I'd know what I needed, and despite seeing all these things, I would not be distracted and I would just focus on what my intention was and be able to do that, efficiently. So you can see how Pratyahara could help us to be much more efficient in our day-to-day life with less distractions and less chance of wasting our time or being distracted by unnecessary stimuli. So this, of course, is important when it comes to meditation. Because essentially the whole process of meditation is a process of turning our attention inwards and getting disconnected from the outside world. And we want to get more and more connected to our inner reality, ultimately something beyond our mind. So this is what makes meditation so challenging, of course, because essentially we're going against the very nature of the mind. As I mentioned earlier, the nature of our mind is always to go out through the five senses. So when we are planning to meditate, we are consciously deciding, actually, no, I'm going to sit and turn my attention inwards. And this is not easy. We're basically going against the very nature of the mind. I say it's like trying to swim upstream. The mind is going this way and we're trying to go this way. So it requires effort, it requires determination, it requires focus, it requires commitment. And of course, these are all the things that make meditation challenging. But ultimately, the rewards are great. Ultimately, if we can conquer our mind, if we can turn the direction of the mind, we have a tremendous force under our conscious control, and we can do great things with that force. If we don't do it, we run the risk of our lower mind taking us anywhere and everywhere, and sometimes making our life rather chaotic. So, it's worth the investment and the effort to try and learn how to subdue and learn how to manage the mind more effectively. So when we sit for meditation, first thing we do, of course, is we practice Pratyahara. We disconnect from the outside world physically. So generally we'll choose a quiet place to sit, and we'll switch off the lights, we'll close the eyes, we'll keep our body still. So we're reducing the physical stimuli to a minimum. You know, this is particularly important if you're a beginner in meditation, where you're not used to controlling your mind. So you want to reduce the distractions to a minimum by having a quiet, calm place and dark place, etc. And that's also one of the reasons why we say it's good to meditate early in the morning before sunrise. Generally, that's a very quiet time of the day. There's not much activity going on, so you're less likely to be distracted by things. But even when we've closed our eyes, the situation doesn't necessarily get easier. In fact, it gets more difficult. Why? Because then our own imagination takes over. So, you know, so the mind is saying, okay, so you've disconnected me from the world outside. So then now let me pull out my own old video recordings and start, you know, playing my own home movies. So we'll find that our mind starts replaying all sorts of memories, and all sorts of ideas and imaginations will start coming into our mind. We'll be projecting into the future imaginations. We'll be going back into the past memories, and basically going around in all directions mentally. So that, of course, is another big challenge. How do we manage this? And this is, I would say, it's like an internal pratyahara. So we have these internal stimuli going on, which are still based on thoughts, which are still based on sensory experiences that we've had, be they imaginations or memories. But still we have to handle them in the same way. We have to be able to see them, but not get attached to them. And this is also pratyahara in a more virtual way. So the ability to see our thoughts, to see our memories, to see our imaginations, but not to be attached to them and not to be taken away by them. The ability to step back from them. We call this being a silent witness of the mind. Try to be a witness of the mind. Just watch the mind without getting involved. So the idea is not that we should try to stop or suppress the mind or try to push thoughts out of our mind. That's not actually practical. It'll actually create more stress and disturbances in our mind. We have to develop the ability to allow the mind to flow. The mind is flowing like a river, but that we can sit on this bank of the river and watch the flow without jumping into the river every time. So as thoughts come up, we're not going to jump at them or get involved with them. We let them pass. And if we let them pass, they will disappear naturally. So this is what we call being a silent witness, or sakshi bhav, being a witness approach. And it's another level of pratyahara, because essentially it's about seeing without looking, hearing without listening, touching without feeling, right? So we're not getting affected by the mental imaginations or sensations now. And this teaching also comes up, in the Bhagavad Gita. If you're familiar with Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 6, Lord Krishna is teaching Arjuna, his disciple, the technique of meditation. And after explaining the system to Arjuna, Arjuna replies and says, what you say is good, makes sense, but it's very, very difficult to do. In fact, he says it would be easier to control the wind than to control the mind. And Krishna acknowledges this. He says, yes, you're right, but it is possible. And he mentions two key points, how to make it possible. What he calls abhyasa and vairagya. Abhyasa means a regular practice, and vairagya means dispassion. So the dispassion is again tying in with pratyahara. The ability not to get taken away by sensations, not to be passionate. Passionate means over-identification with some stimuli. So to be cool, neutral, stand off, witness, that is called dispassionate. To be objective, ultimately to be professional actually, To be a professional means you need to develop dispassion, not to allow your own personal feelings and thoughts to get in the way of what's going on. To be in a neutral position, to be a scientist actually. A scientist is dispassionate, is objective. So this is called vairagya, the ability to observe your own mind without getting carried away by emotions or likes and dislikes. And to do this on a regular basis, do this practice, this is the abhyasa, keep doing this practice, which I'm sure you'll appreciate if you are practicing meditation. This is a constant challenge. Every time we sit for meditation, we have to face this mind and all its ramblings this way and that way. And time after time, we have to learn how to step back and not get affected and not get involved. And that's the abhyasa part. And it's not just going to happen in one shot. It's not going to happen in 2 shots or 3 shots. It's an ongoing practice. We can expect it to be a regular feature of meditation, until the end of our days. That we have to keep up this practice of being a witness and not identifying with the contents of the mind. Not identifying particularly in what we could say in an emotional way. Just to see things very objectively in a dispassionate way. And if we can do this, then we will find that we diffuse the mind very much. The mind, the energy of the mind will become down much quickly if we can get this dispassion. And the mind will become much, much more calm and peaceful. That state of sama that we mentioned earlier. We can experience a calm state of mind when we have this dispassion in the mind. But it's an ongoing practice and it requires constant practice and observation and self-awareness and mindfulness. And hopefully not only during meditation time, but ultimately even in our normal day-to-day activities, that we can cultivate this attitude of mindfulness and the ability to step back from our reactions and emotional reactions and outbursts and impulses. Yeah. And this is really very essential practice, this detachment, if we want to progress in meditation, especially from Pratyahara it goes to Dharana, concentration. And so unless we can do this Pratyahara, we really will not be able to do the Dharana, concentration. Because Dharana is the ability to keep the mind in one place for indefinite amount of time. Swami Shivananda mentions the figure of 12 seconds. If you can keep your mind in one place for 12 seconds, you are practicing dharana or concentration. Actually, 12 seconds is a very, very long time to be focused. Most of the time our mind is hardly focused for even 1 second. Our mind is so fast, it's just continuously moving. So 12 seconds is actually a very, very long time to keep the mind in one place. So unless we are practicing Pratyahara, it's not going to happen. Unless we have that habit of letting go of distractions, we're not going to be able to keep our mind in one place. If our mind is in the habit of, going off with any kind of stimulus or this distraction that appears, then naturally we're going to lose our focus almost immediately. So our concentration depends on the ability to do Pratyahara. The better we are doing Pratyahara, the better our concentration will be. So it's directly dependent on the Pratyahara, how well we can concentrate. And the concentration itself also supports the Pratyahara, because when we have to detach from one kind of thought, something's popping up in our mind and we are learning how to detach from it, we cannot just detach and do nothing. The mind cannot just sit in limbo. The mind by nature is active, so it has to be engaged with something. So generally in all forms of meditation, we have something that we're going to try and focus our mind onto. Something usually uplifting, positive, spiritual, saintly, godly, holy. We'll try to focus on that subject. So continuously we're detaching, that's the Pratyahara, and then we have to attach to something else, and that's the concentration. And try to keep the mind there only, that's concentration. So concentration and Pratyahara go together. You can't really do Pratyahara, detach without attaching somewhere else. And at the same time, you can't stay focused on one thing if you don't have the ability to keep letting go of distractions. If you allow the mind to keep going with distractions, you're never really going to be able to focus on one place. So really they go together. They're like, two hands that work together. The Pratyahara and Dharana. So, as you can see, it's a very important aspect of meditation, because only through concentration are we going to be able to go into deeper levels of meditation, and then ultimately to meditation and samadhi. And of course, even in our day-to-day life, how effective we are in our day-to-day life will depend on how focused we are in what we do. So the more focused we are, of course, the more effective and efficient we can be in our day-to-day life. So these are skills that are going to be helpful not only for spiritual practice, but for also our everyday life. And mostly people appreciate these benefits of meditation, because I see that even in day-to-day life, the quality of the day-to-day life improves. Because of these practices, actually, the ability to detach from our own thoughts and emotions, we find we can become more cool, calm, collected in our day-to-day life, less reactive. We feel we can step back from situations more easily and choose consciously how we want to react. And generally, we feel more at peace with ourselves and with things around us. Yeah. So, just to conclude my talk, the title was The Art of Pratyahara. So the title itself is thought-provoking, the art. Normally we think of yoga as a science, actually. We usually talk about yoga as a science. Science means it has a method, and we put that method into practice, and by following the method we get certain experiences and certain knowledge. So it was a bit thought-provoking why call it an art. And according to the definitions that I could find, the difference between art and science, the main one is that art is something that is subjective, that art is something that comes from one's own personal experiences and understanding, whereas science is based on something objective, something that we all have in common and that we can focus onto. They're both sources of knowledge. We say art is an expression of subjective knowledge, whereas science is an expression of objective knowledge. So where does Pratyahara fit in? So I think Pratyahara fits into both, actually. Being part of the yoga system, it is part of a system, it is part of a technique, so therefore it's quite scientific, that if we follow these practices, we will have consistent results, whoever you are. But at the same time, there is an art to it, because we all have different minds, we all have slight different inclinations and attachments, likes and dislikes, aversions. So the way we handle our mind will depend a lot on our own individual personality and abilities and so on. So ultimately it will become our own skill, our own art, how we handle our own mind. And how effectively will we be able to detach and control our senses. There is an art to that, which will depend on us, on our own potential and our own way of seeing it, the importance of it, and how we put it into practice. So I think it's a relevant title, The Art of Pratyahara. And so I'm going to conclude now. I finished the talks as usual here by chanting Om 3 times, and then final prayer. The final prayer expresses our gratitude for having this opportunity to teach and to learn and to share this knowledge with you, and may we share this information with everyone so that everyone may benefit from these teachings, ancient teachings. Thank you. So I'll chant the final prayers. Om. 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 Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivadanam Urvarukame bandhanat mrityo mukshiyamamritat. Om Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivardhanam. Urvarukame bandhanat mrityo mukshiyamamritat. Om Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivardhanam. Urvarukame bandhanat mrityo mukshiyamamritat. Om Sarvesham Swastiya Bhavatu, Sarvesham Shantiya Bhavatu, Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu, Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Makashit Dukhabha Bhavet, Asato Ma Satgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityo Mamritam Gamaya. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.